Our esteemed guests, the president of Ağrı İbrahim Çeçen University, Professor Dr. Abdülhalik Bulut, IC Chairman of the Board of Directors, Mr. İbrahim Çeçen, Command Symposium Board Presidents, Professor Dr. Wyatt, and Professor Dr. Ağrı Belli, dear academicians, students, and the organizing committee who have hosted us so well. Thank you very much for having us here. It is a privilege to be here in Ağrı. One of the great stories of antiquity is that of the Great Flood, an inundation of the world that was so extensive that it destroyed all human and animal life. So the Great Flood saved those that were reserved in the Great Boat, called in English the ark. It is from these survivors that the animal and human life was restored to the earth after the waters of the flood subsided. The story of the Great Flood was so popular, so well known, that it was preserved in numerous accounts and copied through the centuries and millennia over and over again. The ancient flood story is preserved in ancient tablets such as the Sumerian king list, which includes the flood story, the Akkadian Atrahasis epic, and the Babylonian Gilgamesh epic. The latter was repeated with several variations down to at least the 7th century BC. This is the Sumerian king list, the Gilgamesh epic tablet 11, and the Atrahasis epic, all recording the flood story. These famous flood stories were also recorded, as we all know, in the holy books of the three great monotheistic religions, Judaism, the Hebrew Torah, Christianity, the Bible, and Islam, the Quran. Thus, beyond the intellectual interests of scholars of the ancient Near East, there is a deeply held belief about the flood of peoples of faith, including local peoples who live in southeastern Anatolia, Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, etc. An interesting feature about the three great faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is that they are historic faiths, which means, among other things, that the events that are described in their holy books are necessarily rooted or founded in history, that the events described in the holy books really happened. The result of this historic nature of their faiths have led people of faith to search for physical correlates between geology, archaeology, and the stories of the holy books. The result of this search for correlates is that scholars are presented with a plethora, many different sites and relics that each support the various traditions in their own way. Hence, there is more than one idea about the location and size of the flood. There is more than one location for Mount Ararat. Indeed, there is more than one name for Mount Ararat. There is more than one location for the landing place of the ark, and there is more than one location for Noah's tomb, and so forth. To explain this problem a little further, the Hebrew Bible tells us that the ark landed on the mountains of Ararat. Scholars have taken note of the plural form of the expression mountains of Ararat, and have suggested that the expression may not be the naming of an actual mountain. Thus, while it is common to describe the mountain where the ark landed as Mount Ararat, people through the ages have suggested that the actual mountain may have another name. These names include Mount Nisir, Mount Cudi, Mount Asis, Mount Luar, and so forth. These names typically refer to different mountains in today's world. This means there is more than one candidate for Mount Ararat. This also necessarily means that there is more than one candidate for the landing place of the ark. This in turn has affected the tradition as to where Noah lived and is buried after the flood. It is usually assumed that Noah lived in close proximity to the mountain where the ark landed. Thus, most of these mountains have a location nearby that is identified as the burial place of Noah. A good survey of these mountains provides an idea of the dilemma of a scholar, whether they be a theologian, a historian, or an archaeological person like myself. We face this problem of trying to find physical or artifactual correlates with the story found in the holy books. One of the first questions confronting the research of Noah's Ark and the flood is identifying the landing place of the ark. While many mountains have been proposed, the three favorite candidates are Mount Nisir in northern Iraq, Mount Cudi in southeast Turkey, and Ağrı İbrahim in eastern Turkey. This map shows the three principal candidates for the biblical Mount Ararat of the flood. Mount Nisir. Genesis 8:4, the Bible says simply that the ark landed on the mountains of Ararat. Many have pointed out that the use of the plural indicates the Bible writer did not have a specific mountain in mind. The Epic of Gilgamesh, however, provides the name of a specific mountain. According to Tablet 11, 141a of Gilgamesh, the ark landed on Mount Nisir, also called sometimes Mount Nimush, many to be identified with Pir Omar Gudrun, today known as Jabal Pirat Magrun, or Pira Magrun, in northern Iraq. That's about 2588 meters high. Curiously, while this mountain has been occasionally the destination of mountain climbers, there is no evidence for a serious scientific expedition to see if any archaeological remains are on this mountain. And here's Mount Nisir in northern Iraq. Mount Cudi, or Cudi is Noah's place of descent, the location where the ark came to rest after the Great Flood. It can be traced back to the 3rd century Babylonian priest Berosus, whose ideas were picked up by early Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thinkers. According to the Quran, 1144, the final resting place of the vessel was called Cudi, without the word mountain. The Quranic tradition is similar to the Judeo-Christian legend. Here's a picture of Mount Cudi. Picture of Berosus. On Cudi, some claim that some wood found on an mountain in 1954 by the German geologist Friedrich Ender might have something to do with the ark. Specifically found pea-sized, brittle, decayed wooden remains. Most of these wooden pieces were cemented by asphalt or pea-like substance. After studying it in a German laboratory, he reported after thorough dissolution of the asphalt with tetrachloride, the wooden fragments were dated, according to C14, to about 6635, give or take 280 years before 1950. The second test, when all available materials used up, confirmed the result. Roller speculates that maybe this was indeed a piece of the ark, but it is now lost because it was consumed by the test, and no photographs were taken of this wood. There's a bad photo of Dr. Ender, geologist. I know him from working in Jordan. He worked there as well, and the mountain he worked on. References to later remains on Cudi, which were thought to commemorate the location of the landing place of the ark, include 18th century English Orientalist George Solly, who says that there was once a famous Christian monastery on Mount Cudi and that this was destroyed by lightning in 776 AD. The famous British explorer, a lady, Gertrude Bell, climbed Mount Cudi in 1909 and took one of the earliest photographs there. She also mentioned the destroyed monastery and other archaeological remains in the vicinity. She saw the place of the ark's landing, but not the ark. Here's George Solly and the famous Gertrude Bell. And this is her famous 1909 photograph I'm sure many of you have seen. The third mountain associated with the landing place of Noah's Ark is Ararat, also known as Mount Nisir, or Twin Mountain. It is often claimed that it is the most recent candidate for Noah's landing place, not having received much attention until about the 12th century AD. However, recent studies indicate that its association with Noah and the flood actually goes back much earlier. It is Masis, or Mashu, in the Gilgamesh epic that Gilgamesh climbs to find the entrance that will take him to find the flood hero, Utnapishtim, recorded in the Gilgamesh epic, which is dated to about the 10th to 7th centuries BC. It is also the twin peak Masis that is depicted on ancient Mesopotamian cylinder seals dating to more than 2000 BC that show Ea, the god of waters, pouring out the sources of the waters of both the Euphrates and Tigris rivers that led to the flood. And we know the sources of these rivers are right near us here in Ağrı. Mount Ararat. Here's the Mesopotamian cylinder seal dating to 2200 BC. In the middle, I'm speaking English here, you have the god Shamash, the god of the sun coming out of the twin peaks. No one doubts this is referring to Ararat. And this is another interesting cylinder seal that shows the sun god coming out between this two peaks. He would represent the sun, of course. I won't mention the other deities, but to the right, you'll see a god, Ea, has out of its shoulders 2 streams of water with fish in them. One represents the Tigris River, the other the Euphrates River. So in antiquity, they saw this as the source of the flood. So Ağrı was always important in earliest times. A close study of the Hebrew text on Ararat indicate that it was written before the kingdom of Urartu was formed in the 9th century BC approximately. Hence, before the boundaries of Ararat expanded far enough to include Cudi or Mount Nisir, it seemed to have included only Ağrı, referencing Gilgamesh to the ark being a ziggurat. Raises the intriguing question as to whether there was a temple on the mountain of Ağrı, either constructed from Noah's ark, as Gilgamesh implies, or built later by ardent believers in the story of arks landing on that mountain. There is a picture of the boundary of a mature kingdom of Urartu when it was at its peak. Here's the original territory before it became a kingdom. It only includes the area of Ararat in the northeast corner. And then this is an intriguing seal because it shows on the top of the mountain, not Ağrı in this case, that you see one of the gods ascending on a ziggurat on top of the mountain for worship. Could there be a temple on top of Ağrı? That's a curious question for me. Archaeological evidence for human activity, apart from the detritus or the garbage of modern hikers and explorers at Ağrı, is elusive. Reports of wood, pottery, rope, parchment, manuscripts have been made. But the collection of these materials was not done according to proper scientific archaeological standards, and the provenance, the actual location of these materials, is uncertain. Nevertheless, what has been seen paints a picture of possible human activity and construction on Ağrı that ranges in dates from 100, 200 years ago to the medieval period and perhaps to the early Bronze Age, 2,000 years before Christ. However, this observation needs to be checked scientifically and tested. Here's some of the pictures of wooden chambers supposedly found on Ağrı, and wood that's said to come from under the rock and ice on top of the mountain. A final thing that has gained prominence and must be addressed is the Durupinar or Mount Ararat site. This is just referred to by our colleague here. Due to its size and ship-like shape, this large aggregate structure is considered by some to be Noah's Ark. During a 1959 geodetic survey of Turkey, an anomalous shape near the village of Uzungili, not far from Durupinar, was identified by Ilan Durupinar of the Turkish Air Force and another colleague. The site is located about 17 miles southwest of Ağrı. The size and shape of the object resembles a boat approximately 450 feet or 140 meters long and 46 meters wide, inviting speculation that it could be Noah's Ark. American evangelist George Van organized an expedition to this place in 1960, but he concluded it was only a natural geologic formation. Interest in the site was renewed by American nurse and ethicist Ron Wyatt, who visited the site in 1977, 1979, and 1984. Based on Wyatt's vigorous promotion of his research, the Turkish government declared the site a national park in 1986. More recently, a geologist here from Turkey, Murat Akçi, has conducted perhaps the most thorough geologic study, except for the one I just heard about today from our rector colleague sitting next to me, of the phenomena, and he concluded that the ship-like feature is a piece of an undeformed remnant of hard limestone that broke off from the main source upslope and was brought downslope by a slump-tide landslide. For Akçi, the phenomenon is purely geological. Beyond the question as to where the ark actually landed is necessarily related question regarding the extent of the flood. All ancient traditions depict a devastating event that wiped out all of, or a significant part of humanity, their settlements, their animals, and their crops. The event was of such a magnitude that it made a permanent, indelible impression on the minds of both individuals and entire societies. Stories of the flood transcend many languages and cultures. Modern scholars generally don't deny that there had to be some sort of major flood in antiquity to make such an impression on the social psychology. But where was it, and how big was it? Many scholars have reasonably assumed that the flood was restricted to the Mesopotamian valley, caused by extraordinary flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Other scholars suggest the flood occurred in the Black Sea. Still other scholars argue for a flood in the Persian Gulf. And finally, some scholars say that the Hebrew says very clearly that the flood covered the entire earth. So you have the local flood theory, the Black Sea flood, which drowned all the coastal cities around the shore, and the Persian Gulf flood. These are some of the proposals. The scholar must respect what the local understanding means to local people, Armenians, Georgians, Kurds, Turks, and so on. And the scholar must respect what these stories read to the religious traditions of the great faiths of these people, including Jewish, Christian, and Muslims. Too often, these ideas about the flood, Ararat, the ark, are studied in isolation, myopically, perhaps due to the researcher's biases. They focus on one mountain or another, one ark site or another. However, each of these manifestations reveals certain information. Each of these sites has something to say. And often they may possess contact points with the parallel traditions of other ethnic groups with different religious and ideological perspectives. When a broader view is seen, greater insights can be gained and there is a greater chance of finding truth. One of the goals that I see for this symposium is to call for a more inclusive and comprehensive scientific study of all these proposed sites and interpretations to make a good scientific investigation. Now I'm concluding. The Greeks were noted for their great colonization programs in the 9th and 8th centuries before Christ. Each colony that was founded produced its own origin or creation story. In Greek, these are called hetesis stories. Hetesis meaning origin or creation. These stories always were based in a certain reality. They preserved the memories, traditions, and things that brought that community into existence. The flood, Mount Ararat, and the ark can be said to be the greatest of all hetesis stories, in that it is universal in scope, encompassing all of humanity and not just a single people. It is our collective origin, our creation story, that should be studied with respect and seriousness. It is often said that Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization. That may be so, but if Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization, then it must be recognized that Anatolia is its birthplace. Sure, the birthplace of civilization merits our most serious reflection, research, and study. Thank you.